Hi everyone, welcome to AGS IS Academy for UPSC and PCS. This video is for PSIR or Political Science and International Relations of Western Political Thought or WPT for IS PCS Mains Exams 2022. This elaborate political philosophy will be quite useful for the aspirants of civil services. This video is also useful for UGC NET JRF SET Slet 2021 2022 exams, and of course also useful for college and university students of Western political thought. Dear friends, in this video we would try to discuss, we try to find out regarding John Locke under part third, which we are discussing. We had already covered two parts of John Locke, part 1 and part 2, and we had discussed in a very elaborate way, in a very detailed way that is essential to understand the very concept of John Locke's political philosophy. And we had covered lot other things in very much detail to have concept clarity for those who want to understand and have the views about John Locke. Dear friends, today the very important part of John Locke we are going to discuss under, that's about like property or theory of value and property related issues we'll discuss today under this. And as yesterday I had discussed about some important parts of John Locke's quotations, and I had made one video yesterday which were covering almost, which was in a position to give you important quotations of this particular thinker, and lot many quotations we had discussed, try to understand about that, and we had already covered in the previous part of this John Locke state of nature or natural rights. Today we will be discussing in this video property or theory of value, and then having different notions, be it Macpherson, be it like Karl Marx, be it like Tooley and others, and also covering civil society along with this. So let's have the view about this. Video will be slightly bigger to let you have understanding in deeper ways, and that's essential to understand, from where you can pick up some important informations for your and from your perspectives of exams. So property about John Locke's. Difference, we know Locke's treatment or Locke's perception, John Locke's understanding of the concept of property is definitely very broad, very vast, at the same time can be said to be narrow also. And it is considered one of the great contributions in the history of political thought, and it is the same aspect which has been criticized from some quarters down the line. But then, as we know, like it always happens, there happens to be two coins, two aspects of the same coin. So is the case with John Locke. And when John Locke's position or understanding comes over this property, it covers human interest, aspirations, and particularly material goods. As we know, human beings' nature are somewhat that nature which plays important role. Human being per se being the blend of many greed factors, being the blend of selfishness, rationality, logical, everything, including everything is there. But on the top of everything, the priority happens to be about more fascination towards temporal things than the spirituality or the incarnation of God. We had discussed like in natural law versus incarnation of God or like churches. And John Locke tries to point out here in this connection where he talks about like property or values about that. He says natural right that is derived from labor is something which he discusses in second treatise of chapter 5, and he also talks about individual ownership of goods and property. According to John Locke, that is justifiable when the labor is exerted to procure such goods, and he talks at least where there is the sufficiency of goods and lands, and that is extra, we can say surplus, or application of property to produce goods is very much advantageous to human society. Dear friends, when we try to understand about the talks of like property of John Locke, at the same time interpretation given by C.B. Macpherson, who sometimes happens to be the defender of unlimited capitalist accumulation of John Locke, has used as a comment on John Locke's property theory. Dear friend, when we talk about the second treatise of John Locke, which gives glimpses of values to society as well, and the role of labor expanded in the creation of goods, lands, services. So the labor's role becomes decisive, and as can be understood from his premise, a labor theory of value, which what we call like John Locke developed as a labor theory of property, on the basis of which ownership of property is definitely supposed to be the creation by the application of labor in a way that is essential for the society. And he keeps on talking the property is so significant of any humanity in the state of nature. At times, even that precedes before the government, or even regarding regime of any state or any country even does not have the authority which can dispose the states of the subject automatically, arbitrarily, or from its own law, not consistent with the values of the subjects or the human nature of that state. Dear friends, what we are talking property theory under this political thought slide is not included, but since this is important, so I'm discussing here, and along with will come civil society of John Locke. Dear friends, if you talk and if you see from Max Person's point of view, then he analyzes John Locke would have three categories of limitations on the accumulation of property. So far, the state of nature under social contract or like commonwealth is concerned. Commonwealth, as we know, like was talked by Leviathan, while social contract, when we see, it was talked by John Locke. Dear friends, so these three categories and classifications of uh, property, like you can say appropriation as much as one can apply of property before it really gets wasted or spoils. can be said to be one classification or categorization, as mentioned under second treatise. And if you talk about like second classification of John Locke's, when there is the capacity enough and enough goods are left, then that should be for somebody else who can apply, who can use those surplus part. And third classification of this categorization of property can be the appropriation of property by virtue of the application of labor. Means labor's environment should be there in such a way that, since plays important role, has to be taken into account. Dear friends, the sufficiency limitation is definitely transited when there is a talk of, when there is the proposition or creation of personal property, and that is contingent upon the increment of productivity, even for those who don't really own private property. But when they'll be open to nurture, acquire ownership of property, definitely will have the process of procuring property. Dear friends, it's very essential. Everything cannot be regulated and put under limitations by the regime of the state anywhere, according to John Locke of that era, what he's talking about. He says human nature or human being anywhere in the world needs to have property states so that can survive in the society and then can live a life of respect and dignity. Dear friends, when we talk about like John Locke's theory of value and property and interpretation of it, then he says the government does not have even that power which can really create any hurdle in the procurement of property. This is something which those who have idea about Karl Marx, about his like capitalist interpretation or his bourgeois class, proletariat class, and he criticizes the accumulation of property. But here at this point of time, to some extent, Lockean views is lenient enough to provide the sigh of relief for those who are interested to accumulate property. If you see from the perspective of Macpherson's view, when he says enough and as good should be the need of the hour for whom he or she wants to have the property, and then that should be a symbol of opportunity to acquire, and that is essential to spend the life, but that should be through labor. Dear friends, as I had talked about at the very outset about John Locke, at the very beginning, Macpherson's role has been very important in giving commentaries over John Locke's theory of property, and so is the case with this point as well. When Macpherson talks about John Locke and then underlines about the recognition of the labor which can be alienated, then in that case Macpherson happens to be critical and it talks about possessive individualism. And Locke's theory of property, according to him, that is the reflection in the society. And rationality and capitalist and wage laborers, and about the division of society in different classes, also find reflections in his talks. Dear friends, McPherson is somebody. McPherson is such an author or like thinker who tries to understand of Locke, but his views also have been criticized in different perspectives regarding this issue. And it's like wise enough to add Alan Ryan his argument regarding property for Locke, and definitely in that which could be the part of life, liberty, and the state, and the two treatises. And in this connection, land also happens to be important issue to become members of political society. Dear friends, if we talk about like James Tooley, he was also critical of MacPherson's interpretation regarding the first treatise, which talks about a duty of charity for those who have no other means of subsistence. And what it tries to say, it tries to say there is debates and counter debate, and the debate follows about positive points, negative points, and as we had discussed at the very beginning, there are always a source of understanding our new issue whenever new issue creeps in the society or anywhere, that immediately is being scrutinized by 2 points. One is positive and second is negative. It entirely depends upon the society, which is crucial and beneficial to inculcate for the right perspective. Dear friends, John Locke's political theory actually was based upon that of social contract, and same cannot be said when we talk about Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes. And John Locke, who had firm belief about the human nature, he talked about human nature was not like fighting against all, and there was a chaos and anarchy in the society which like being painted by Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan. But John Locke believed firmly about the veracity and logical conclusion, logical discourse of humanity in terms of tolerance and reason. Dear friends, we need to understand in this particular video when we talk about, when we cover other issues of John Locke. And further, he believed that human nature, though definitely it can be said, has the sense of selfishness, which is very much natural in every case, that temporal things really lure anybody for a variety of reasons we are best known to everyone. And John Locke, in a natural state, he also attaches tremendous value to humanity regarding the equality, independence, self dignity, and on the top of everything, he had the sense in understanding that everybody had the right to defend his life, health, liberty, or possessions. So it is explains volumes. What does it mean? Say, for example, in exam, the question came that that defending life, health, liberty, or possessions in the form of a natural right in the state of nature, what actually John Locke tries to explain, illustrate your answer with the help of suitable examples. Then the answer should be what we are discussing accordingly. Same thing should be put over there. Dear friends, when this the question of defending life, defending life means what? Defending life means it sends a strong signal to the regime anywhere in the world that you cannot play with the lives of human beings, that you cannot really encroach upon the very values, very intrinsic factor of the life which is essential to survive. It sends a strong message to not only in the contemporary global society, also at that point of time, that the basic components, intangible factors, tangible factors of the humanity needed to be defended, and also cannot play with the life and health. Health too cannot be jeopardized in one or other form of the humanity, be it in a state of nature or be it in different perspective, is the reflection of John Locke what he tries to paint when he says afterlife health. Further, when he talks about liberty, liberty here is connecting with like freedom. Human nature, by virtue of origin in this world, carries certain things to survive, and among them is liberty and freedom to lead the life the way a humanity really believes in that. And that cannot be taken, that cannot be snatched away by any regime anywhere in the world what it is being painted. And it was painted at that point of time of John Locke, and precisely that was so important. Also, besides that, no statement, no formulation, no strategy, no planning, no laws can really disposes any human being from his or her possessions, what is possessing to or belong to that person anywhere in the world, what like John Locke tries to convey. Dear friends, though there are many scholars who trace the phrase like liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness, they try to find the connectivity of this with the very famous the American Declaration of Independence, which finds reflections in John Locke's theory of natural rights. That's quite obvious whenever there is an issue, there is a revolution, there is the issue of human rights, then the basic rights of any humanity anywhere in the world will automatically get connected. Dear friends, from Thomas Hobbes' perspective, John Locke had the perception of sole right to defend when he talks about the humanity and human nature in the state of nature. And then here the role of a contract came. Dear friends, under this video of political thought, now we'll be discussing about civil society and connectivity with John Locke's. So what is this here when John Locke talks about civil society is the confirmation of when the people were having problems, when the people were defenseless, when the people were not in a position to defend what actually they had and what actually they want to carry on, and they were facing tremendous problems, then the human beings of the nature of the state decided to have a kind of contract which could be useful for the public at large anywhere in the world, so that the public can really have the defending perception of their innate rights, or those rights which are very much crucial and essential to survive a human being. Dear friends, when the human nature or human being was in a defenseless position, then they tried to find out exactly what should be the ways and means to lay the foundation which could act as a guardian to defend the public, the property, the liberty, the life, the health of human beings in the state of nature, and to whom the entire public can really repose the trust. And on that basis, the trust should be continued, and the trust should be really implemented, but all for right reasons for the public, not the other way around. And this is what led to the formation of a civil society. In a way, it was a society to tide over the crisis of conflict in a better manner, in a healthy way, in a constructive way, in a civil way. And the civil society which has been made, that should act as a tool in the formation of, in the redressal of the disputes which are so essential from public's perspective and from human beings' perspective. Dear friends, when we talk about civil society in this sense, which is even now across the world very famous, and then it plays decisive role and acts as a tool and acts or connects dots in various capacities, is very essential. So from that era of John Locke, civil society in a way also finds reflection before that in what you call Commonwealth with different name in Leviathan. But Leviathan gave tremendous power unilaterally to the government, while here it is being moderated and enlightened to some extent from the point of views of the public. Dear friends, civil society, according to John Locke, can play an important role in overall taking care. And John Locke advocated there should be the separation of powers, and the regime must act in the prudence of the public, for the wisdom of the public, for the protection of the society at large. That's so essential. Otherwise, there is no meaning of civil society anywhere. There is no meaning of commonwealth anywhere. And there is no meaning of the humanity to survive as a human being. Dear friends, what is essential anywhere in the world is, according to John Locke, the public at large will have the right to resistance in case there is a failure on the part of the regime which is not able to defend the very interest for which civil society was made. Dear friends, as we are discussing, this video is under the banner of AGS IS Academy. And the entire discussion over John Locke's political philosophy is meant for you for the same banner. Dear friends, so in case of failure, the trust, or there is a breach of trust from the establishment, in case of failure regarding the purpose for which it was made, then the public will have a profound understanding as to what should be done and what will be the right that needs to be done, what John Locke talks about. And these very notions tremendously found influences over the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, what we see today as the biggest power on the earth, US, got tremendous reflections of his thoughts and perceptions. Now, but the question is there any limitation regarding the property? Is there any limitation or restriction regarding the earning of the property. Dear friends, what is essential? This is general question like many thinkers have tried to ask and tried to find out and tried to inquire basically about the philosophical concept of the theory of property of John Locke. But John Locke has different say and understanding when he talks about it. He does not say that the accumulation of property is only essential, unlimited. Yes, that is essential, but as and when there is requirement or there is extra left property which is likely to be wasteful, then that can be a kind of offense and should be avoided. Only the required amount of property which are essential should be there, but then private acquisition of property should not be any hindrance on the way of formulation or procurement of property for any public, as it is the labor which is involved on the part of the entity or the person who tried to acquire it. Dear friends, in the post introduction of durable goods, man could have exchanged or man could have saved, or in due course of time, if a person feels that the nature of the property could be wasted, then in that case, and the goods are perishable, then for that, and if that will not last long enough and that will go against the natural law, then the very concept of John Locke talks about there is every right for the public to get it exchanged in other forms for the safety of the accumulation of or the maintenance of the wealth. And so is the introduction of money that definitely laid the foundation of this process and making possible the huge accumulation of property without creating problem and waste through spoilage. Dear friends, it turns out to be really a very innovative idea that how goods and services or how property or wealth can be saved if the goods are of perishable nature. Then what should be done? Really, credit goes to John Locke when he talks about, like in that case, look, here is an option, and the option is that can be converted, that property can be converted into the savings of gold and silver, and that can be used, that can be hoarded up, but without jeopardizing others' interest, and thus their properties will be also saved. Dear friends, this is one of the natures of the property theory, what we are talking right now under the banner of AGS IS Academy. And for this platform, this discussion is going on. Dear friends, he also talks about the property will not really be spoiled or decayed in the hands of the possessor when this system is introduced, and also introduction of money that also limits, that also eliminates the restrictions of accumulation. Dear friends, there are many queries, questions, and counter questions and debates over the issue of accumulation of wealth. Everywhere in the society or in the world or in the states, it happens. If there is an illegal hoarding of the accumulation of wealth, that creates problems. But John Locke has on defensive theory when it talks about as long as the wealth is accumulated and does not create problems for others, and as long as it helps in contractually or establishing civil society, or the law of the land regulates property, or does not create inequality, or has nothing to do with creation of other problems, or it does not harm others in any way, but is the creation for self procured labor based on that, then there is no reason why the person really should be in trouble. Dear friends, Locke talks about inequality and he says, look, inequality is not like the factor or the fallout of the labor. Accumulation of wealth, if comes through pious labor for any human being, then what is wrong in that? The wrong takes place only when that is being created by illegal means, not justified through the law of the land or the civil society or commonwealth. That is something which happens to be problematic. Dear friends, he says, leave this in the hands of the law of the civil society, and implies that the government would really act and moderate the issues or disputes which are creeping regarding unlimited accumulation of property, or when we talk about like identical distribution of property or wealth. And it talks that this should not be the bone of contention between the two individuals in the state of nature, rather should be left in the hands of the regime which is equipped enough to tide over the crisis and to resolve the issue of the nature of the dispute. Dear friends, according to John Locke, he talks about the wealth creation is not a wrong and does not identify and how the government would take care and try to solve the issue. It should not be the issue of the public. It should not be the issue of the one party of the social contract. Dear friends, because not all elements or entire components of the party should be factoring to resolve the issue, something is the part of the governance. The lever theory of value, according to two treatises of government stance, and definitely talks about how best any issue or the conflict, if comes, should be solved with the demand and supply theory of value, developed in due course of time in a letter that was written bearing the title about some considerations on the consequences of regarding the issue of interest and about money, their values and their interpretations. Dear friends, when you talk about like John Locke's anchoring regarding wealth in labor, somehow it appears that John Locke tries to unrestrict the accumulation of wealth if that is the involvement of value, rather that is the involvement of labor. Dear friends, it is so essential, and not only like in the era of John Locke while he was undergoing, Take the example of most of the countries which firmly believe in equality and inclusive growth of the society or the country, then also takes care about the factors which are contingent upon the eradication of poverty and bring the have nots of the society to some extent to a level where they can also have the right to livelihood and survive. So, what we got in this connection from John Locke's perspective is we are seeing debates and counter debates. And regarding price theory of John Locke, regarding value and price, that basically is factored upon supply and demand theory, which was also talk of in the letter for the parliament in 1691 with the title of lowering of interest and considerations on the consequences regarding the value of money and rising. Dear friends, it's very clear supply and demand in any society, that is the nature of the inflation or deflation in the market or the price of any commodity, rise and fall of that corresponding to the number of buyers and sellers proportion. Dear friends, so the supply and demand gets regulated and is influenced depending upon the buyers and sellers and their quantifications in the market, and that is so essential. So price theory really finds reflections according to what actually John Locke tries to convey is contingent upon the factors of the market. For further elaboration, when you talk about like John Locke's theory of this money or theory of price, quantity theory of money, that signifies a special case of that general theory which could be based on money answers all things and many interpretations regarding the interests of the public. So far money is concerned, the demand is exclusively controlled by the quantity, irrespective of the fact whether the money is in flow or in stagnation. Dear friends, regarding price theory, John Locke's understanding also reflects upon the facts that the demand and supply and the value of goods is based on their scarcity and then potential to be exchanged and consumed. So what he talks about in this sense here, when we underline, is his understanding about the market sends a strong signal to the public at large and the regime that demand for money corresponding to or identical happens to be the demand for goods or land. It entirely depends upon the medium of exchanges of money, how it's being done. It entirely depends how many states or some states go for exchanging money. Now, if you see in a globalized world, besides the era of John Locke, the convergence or money exchanges and the necessity of that is something that gets reflect upon the policy of the government of that country, and decidedly the policies are formulated to take the next level. Dear friends, money, interest, price fluctuation, supply and demand, or buyers and sellers, all this constitute about the narratives of a government, how that could be in the interest of the country, for which a government takes decision accordingly. Dear friends, regarding the interpretation of money in monetary terms, John Locke talks about two functions of money. One probably could be the counting regarding the value and a place to claim to goods, and it talks about gold as opposed to paper and the appropriate currency for global transactions. And this is very something very interesting, that how the money should be exchanged, how the paper value of the paper money should be underlined, and how the government can interpret money of any country is something which, like John Locke talks about, and then that should be useful from the policy formulation of that government in question. And then next step, John Locke goes and talks about, if the country has to survive, if the country has to progress, develop, if the country has to go ahead, then what should be the propositions for a country to follow is important in a way. The country's trade policy should be favorable. Export should be much better with respect to import. The country should be at the next level of development with the right policy at the center, and that should get reflected. Dear friends, in this connection, John Locke talks about a favorable balance of trade is very essential for any country to progress in all dimensions and directions. That is so essential for the public of that country, the peace, development, and progress, and standard of living, and the eradication of global hunger index, and should be inclusive growth of that country. With the favorable balance of payments for any country, what John Locke talks about, it sufficiently means once the country has or starts getting favorable stock, money stocks, then economy would keep on growing, and then any country of the world must inevitably, steadily try to find out, try to expand its own stock. And in this sense, when we talk about like John Locke, he tries to interpret in a way that's essential for the theory of foreign exchanges, that's useful for any country if that is applicable. Dear friends, besides commodity movements, the stock of money and movements of capital, These two factors are also contingent upon determining exchange rate. Dear friends, John Locke understands and underlines that the country which is suffering from unfavorable balance of trade essentially remains in chaotic economic position and turns out to be vulnerable, and that is something which is not acceptable for the overall health and growth of the country. Dear friends, if the country's money stock grows up with respect to the other countries, then the country's exchange will rise above, and export balance would definitely move on in a favorable term. That would be essentially good and useful. Therefore, dear friends, what we are discussing right now about like how exactly John Locke tries to pen and tries to find out and discuss about different interpretations of property theory, money, debates, counter debates, limitations, and different shades of views of others, other thinkers about him, and the contemporary political thinkers regarding regarding the political philosophies of John Locke. We discussed in a threadbare for broad understanding so that you all can have fair enough ideas about John Locke's property philosophy theory and which could be beneficial in one or other form. Dear friends, this was all about John Locke's property theory. Now we are going to discuss about a topic of John Locke which again after civil society is very beneficial and important, and definitely it plays a decisive role in a broader term, and the title of that is the consent connected with political obligation related to the regime. So the consent, we are talking about the consent. Dear friends, as we know, consent is a base for any political discourse, for any contractual party, for anything, not only in the state of nature of John Locke's era of that time, even today in globalized world, consent plays a decisive role in the absence of which nothing can be possible to really act upon, to take care, to involve in the treaty, to make deeds, or whatever reason could be possibly is not possible in the absence of the consent. Dear friends, the direct understanding of John Locke's political philosophy regarding the concept of consent happens to be the central role when his philosophy is interpreted in different perspectives. And the entire base of analysis of his philosophy regarding the individuality in a state of nature, where the question is of a tug of war prevailing across the region, and the individuals are not able to appreciate as to how what should be done and what moral obligations should be there for the other party or for others, so that there remains a sense of peace and tranquility in the society where everybody is living as by virtue of being rational and logical human beings always desire for and crave for something which definitely suit them. Could be the part of temporal things, but from the perspective of John Locke, the consent is always the basis for the legitimate authority, on the basis of which the power to legislate or even adjudicate or the power to govern to the governed happens. Dear friends, it's quite essential from his political theory of consent under political obligation regarding the regime of any country to underline about the natural state of freedom and independence is only possible regarding the humanity or human beings anywhere in the country or across the world unless these factors are taken into consideration, or unless above all the term consent happens to be consented. The individual consent is decisive, and without that the is political societies are not possible, and any kind of contract, any kind of commonwealth, or any kind of civil society also cannot function for all practical purposes. Dear friends, the most important part in this connection is general obligations and rights that what all people have. Those rights are taken or are based on law of nature, and special political obligations are needed to procure regarding the operations of the society. The state of nature can only be peaceful when the consent is obliged by the regime, by the authority of any country in the world. Dear friends, John Locke talks about how any individual can really become a full-fledged member of society. That will be only possible when it talks about two treatises of contract, or in its two treatises there remains an act of express consent. So it talks about express consent, and that is so essential. Definitely, from his point of view, Locke's theory of consent basically is based on the focus on how few people give the consent to the government, to the regime, to run that, and any legitimate government actually entirely depends on the consent extended by the public at large for the regime to function. In the absence of any consent, the regime of any country, what like John Locke talks about, will not be possible. So, dear friends, precisely on that account explains the reasons why resident resident aliens in any country will have an obligation to obey the laws of the state wherever they tend to reside and wherever they live in that country or in that state. So a kind of residential obligations for the aliens also significant to abide by laws, but even the laws formulated are essentially useful and should be suitable for the subject and should be favorable rather than exploitative tool as an apparatus. Dear friends, in this connection, what like this consent part of John Locke is very significant. Be the children, be the property, be the parents, or anything, then the jurisdiction of the commonwealth or the civil society or any regime at the helm of affairs is contingent upon the fact that the same is accountable to the one from where the power factor is derived. So, in this sense, from John Locke's perspective, that is so essential when he pens and tries to talk about about the debate over whether the inheritance of property should also be based on the tacit or express consent, and then on that basis, based on property, a member can become member of society, and that is also possible through express consent. And John Locke's ideal of explicit mechanism of society, where could be the precondition of inheriting property and explicit declaration about their political obligation. So the consenting factor of an individual to become full-fledged member of the society, or consenting factor of an individual to the regime or to the authority, is significant in the sense, if the consent is there, then only the political legitimacy for any regime is possible in any democratic society, what John Locke talks about basically from his political philosophy. The consent could be the express consent, the consent could be the tacit consent, and that seems needed to explain as to how the governments could be only functioning in the capacity as a representative of the public at large, based on the facts that the true representative of the electorate anywhere in the world, what John Locke talks about, that happens to be relevant not only at that time, rather in the contemporary global discourse. And this is essentially what like he pens, and he tries to see that the consent is the basis for any formulation for the public to see their representative ruling over them, and then is the reflection of what like sees in the regime, and as a tool of trust what they have reposed in the same as a governance or the ruler of that state anywhere in the world. Thanks dear friends, this was like the brief part of consent of this video. This video is slightly bigger in the sense it reflects about the concept and clarity of different ideas of John Locke. Therefore, with that intention this is being made, so that maximum benefits can be given and can be reached to the aspirants or our dear friends who are likely to face different competitive exams or even college or university for the same region. Thanks dear friends, do share, like and subscribe if it's informative for you all. Thanks for watching the video.